What is up, YouTube fam? Robbie C here. Today we are coming out with our first deck list video. I don't know about you guys, but I'm always someone that is passionate about others trying to join in on the hobbies and experiencing the fun and joy that I'm having in the hobby. And card games are certainly one that kind of isn't that fun to play alone. And I think one special thing about Lorcana is the idea that the Disney theme can really reach out and connect with so many different people. Now, something that I'm really passionate about inside of the Lorcana space, and I think something that isn't really existing elsewhere, is the idea of trying to come up with some decks that are beyond what a starter deck's going to look like and have some competitive edges to them. So we're going to try to create some budget decks or some budget upgrades as part of the content that we're releasing here on the channel. Of course, with the release of set 7, we had to start with one of the most iconic themes inside of Disney, and that is the 101 Dalmatians, or puppies. On each character card below the art, you're going to see these tags that categorize them into certain areas that allow them to be heroes, villains. But today, specifically, we're looking at puppies. So what I did is I went over to dreamborn.ink and I just searched for every card that contained the word puppy. And I just added multiple copies of every single card and tried to thin down the numbers from there to create something that I felt like was a little more viable and actually had a sort of focus point to it. Now, where that landed us was on the color combination of amber and sapphire, which has some weaknesses, and we'll talk about that as we sort of talk through the deck. So here's a look at the overall list. I want to talk about why I included certain things and some combinations when you're playing this that you want to be looking for. And at the very end of the video, we'll use our deck evaluator so you can decide what really is a win or a loss for you, and if you want to head out and order this deck yourself. Pretty much everything inside of the deck fits inside of the 101 Dalmatians franchise, except for 4 notable cards. Those are 2 different copies of Stitch, because we know, and according to Lilo, the best dog ever, and Stitch does become one of our pivotal draw engines, which if you didn't see on a previous video on the channel, every good deck needs a draw engine. We also have Popsicle to help with draw, but not only are we using it for card draw, we're also using it for the healing aspect, which is not something that gets used too often when Popsicles appear, because most often they're just getting banished by Hiram Flaversham. But since the goal of the deck is to be a bit more aggressive, pushing the tempo of the game and moving faster, we know that our characters are going to get challenged, and that one of the only ways that we have of removing our opponent's characters is to challenge as well. We want to make sure that we're banishing Popsicles quite often in order to heal our characters up to keep that board presence strong. And last but certainly not least, we have to go with one of the most iconic songs and Let It Go for a little spot removal, just in case they aren't turning their characters sideways. And so Let It Go does exactly that. And that is really the first struggle of this color combination, is just spot removal in general can be very dicey. And so including Let It Go felt like a must, because that way we had some answers as we're playing the deck to their big threats. So one thing you'll notice here, our curve is extremely flat. We have 11 1 costs in the deck, and then we have 16 2 costs, and then it's 8 everywhere else except for our 6 costs, where we have 9. The tricky part about this is that we do a lot of shifting inside of this deck. 2 of our major hitters that really help push the deck forward have a shift feature to them. So while this curve does look very flat on this side, several of our 5 drops are going to feel like they play more like 3 drops, and some of our 6 drops feel like they actually play like 4 drops. So that kind of skews the numbers a little bit on this graph specifically. I'll reference it one last time. If you don't know what I'm talking about with curve, make sure you check out the other video that we dropped on the channel. It's all about building decks 101. Now, we are playing an aggro or aggressive style deck with puppies, so we want to make sure that we're hitting a 1-drop quite often, whether that's drawing cards through Popsicle or we're playing Stitch New Dog, who is in there for really 3 purposes. 1, we want it to have presence on the board on turn 1 and start questing. 2, we're going to be using this to remove cards. We have another card we're going to play later on that's going to allow us to retrieve Stitch from the discard and bring it back to the board when it's been banished. And then third, and probably its most important piece, is when we find Stitch Rockstar, which is one of our best draw engines inside of the deck, we're going to make sure that we are having the shift target so we don't have to pay the full 6 to bring Stitch into the board. Because Stitch, every single time that you play a 2 cost or less character, you can exert that character to draw an extra card, which just allows us to be churning through puppies and playing more puppies, because most of our cards end up being pretty cheap inside of this deck. Speaking of 2 costs, that brings us to the 16 2-cost puppies that we have inside of the deck. Now, one really cool feature about this deck is that you use Dalmatian Puppy Tail Wagger. Most of the time when you play a card inside of a deck, you can only have 4 copies of it. But because of Dalmatian Puppy Tail Wagger, its one ability is that it can be played up to 99 copies. Gotta keep the 101 Dalmatian theme. What's really great about the tail wagger is the idea that it is a 2/3 body, so it's a little tougher to remove from songs like Let the Storm Rage On or Steel Removal, which traditionally just does 2 damage. Makes us talk about the item Canine Crunchies. It's going to buff up every single one of our puppies. For each Canine Crunchies we have, each of our puppies is going to get even more willpower, which is going to let them stay on the board longer, which is going to let them quest longer, which is going to allow us to push our objective, which is to quest and turn and get to 20 as fast as possible. Now, we are running 4 copies of Freckles, the good boy, for really 2 specific reasons. One, I understand that he has a weaker body compared to the tail waggers, but his enter the board effect, where he can lower the strength of one character, allows us to take some positive trades with the Dalmatian puppy tail wagger as well as Stitch New Dog, because we want to keep characters on the board as long as possible. However, eventually we realize that's not going to happen and they're going to start getting banished, which is where Pepper, Quick Thinking Puppy, jumps in. Whenever one of our puppies is banished, it's actually sent to the inkwell face down and exerted. This is going to allow us to ramp and get more ink faster so that we can start playing more puppies as we draw them through Stitch Rockstar and other avenues. You can start to see the combo working here. Now, outside of Stitch Rockstar, we're turning to our favorite puppy, Lucky. Now, both versions of Lucky are going to be our 2 primary draw engines. The 3-drop Lucky Runt of the Litter. Whenever this character quests, look at the top 2 cards of your deck. You may reveal any number of puppy character cards and put them into your hand. For reference, we have 28 puppies inside of this deck. That's right, almost half of our deck is puppies. Every time Lucky quests, not only is he questing for 2, but he's going to help refill our hand. And because of Pepper, we're going to have more ink available. And because of that, we're going to be able to play more puppies and just keep his board presence going. The second version of Lucky has 2 effects. We can either exert it to reveal the top 3 cards of the deck and put each character card with a cost 2 or less into our hand. Whenever we fill our board with the puppy flood, if he quests and we have 4 or more characters on the board, all of our other characters quest for an additional lore, which is super cool because if Lucky's able to stay on the board, and we know we're flooding the board here in a second with playing other characters, then we can make huge lore pushes in one turn. Just think about this. 4 other characters that are all questing for 1, Lucky turns for 1, and suddenly instead of questing for 5 that turn, we're questing for 9. We're getting almost half of our lore in one go simply because we flooded the board while Lucky was there. When you don't have a lot of puppies, be sure to turn him so that you can search for more puppies to refill that hand. And if you have a lot of puppies out, go ahead and turn him sideways to quest, and let's go ahead and get that lore going. All right, moving on to the parental or the big dogs of the deck, pun intended. We're talking about Perdita. We have 2 different copies of Perdita inside of the deck. The first is the 4-drop coming in as the playful mother. Whenever this character quests, you may pay 2 less for the next puppy character you play this turn. We have to remind ourselves that 28 of the cards in the deck are puppies, and of those 28, 16 of them are 2 cost or less themselves, which means we just get to play a free card. On the next turn, without even having to ink, we can quest her, play a puppy for free. We can then spend 2 ink to play another puppy, and then we can spend 2 ink to play another puppy. It's awesome how fast we can flood the board with puppies simply from the help of Perdita. Now, if we switch the combo up a little bit, and let's just say that we have a Stitch Rockstar on the field who every time a 2 cost less or card is there, we quest Perdita and play a 2-cost character, well, we get to exert it and draw a card to refill our hand and replace it. We then spend 2 ink, play a 2-cost character. What do? We get to exert it and draw another card. We play another 2-cost character. We've refilled our hand and still flooded the board at the exact same time. The potentials that we have for combos with Perdita is huge. The second Perdita is a 6-drop mom, who is when you play this character and whenever she quests, you may play a character with a cost 2 or less from your discard for free. So that means as people are trading into our puppies and that Stitch has been making trades, we're able to bring it back to the board, and it's not like it just goes to our hand. They go from the discard straight to the field, which is fantastic. Now, the last 2 puppies that we'll talk about are Pongo, dear old dad, who is sort of the head of the whole family, right? Pongo, when he gets to the board, and I will be honest, he doesn't get to the board all that often, but when he does, he allows us to have just a little bit more gas inside of the tank to make that final push, because at the start of your turn, you look at the cards in your inkwell and you play a puppy character from there for free. You may have noticed in several of the examples already, I'm inking the puppies quite often, but at the start of my turn, I get to simply look at the inkwell and pull one of those puppies that I used to get me into the late game, and I get to play it for free. And even those puppies that were sent to the inkwell by Pepper, I also get to use for free. So you can have this refillable engine between Pepper and Pongo, who are constantly allowing you to create a board presence, do something, make a trade, quest, and then when they get banished, Pongo brings them back for free. But last but not least, certainly, I think probably one of the MVPs of the deck has to be Thunderbolt, the Wonder Dog. This is a bodyguard character, which means when he is exerted, the opposing characters have to challenge through him. He's a 3 strength, 7 willpower body that quests for 2. He can be very tough, but really what makes him shine is puppy shift. You pay 3 to play this character on top of one of your puppies, and it's any of those 28 puppies that you're playing. So if you know one's in danger, you can shift it. So I want to talk you through a couple of your best opening lines that you're looking for in the deck to really put the gas on your opponent to force their hand and start questing as fast as possible. Because once again, we don't have a ton of removal for their late game options outside of Let It Go. Therefore, we want to be winning the game as fast as possible and whenever possible, questing. Most often, when in doubt, turn it out. So on turn 1, you're going to be looking for Stitch New Dog, and you're going to try to play him. You can set up Canine Crunchies with turn 1, or you can refill the hand a little bit with Popsicle, but truly, most often we're looking for Stitch. So don't be afraid to hold on to a 2-drop puppy or 2 and send back several cards in the mulligan or the altar in order to look for Stitch on turn 1. Most games where you have Stitch on turn 1, you're going to have a lot more favorable experience. On turn 2, you're going to be playing either Freckles or a Dalmatian puppy tail wagger just to add more presence. If they don't have any threats on the board, you can quest Stitch freely, but often we're trying to sort of hold him back because that will open up lines for us later on. On turn 3, this is where the path starts to diverge. If you see that you're going to start challenging into characters, then Pepper is a great option because whenever your puppies are banished, and that includes on your turn when you challenge in, they go into the Inkwell, which is going to allow us to ramp up and get to bigger dogs faster. But if that isn't the line that we're looking for, and let's say they have a somewhat decent sized threat, and you want to start continuing to press that gas and quest a little more freely, you can always look to shift Thunderbolt on turn 3 onto your 2-cost puppy that you played, because there's very few games that you're ever not going to see a 2-cost puppy to have a turn 2 play. This allows you to get 2 lore, because remember when you shift a character, it comes in dry, ready to be used. So you can go ahead and quest it for 2 or challenge into an opponent to eliminate one of their threats. And your Stitch can now quest freely because it's sitting behind the wall of Thunderbolt. On turn 4, if you have him, one of the best shift lines possible is to go ahead and shift onto the Stitch Rockstar, get that draw engine going. Stitch Rockstar also quests for 3, but you want to hold off. Usually it's kind of risky to go ahead and quest him immediately to get that 3 lore, just because that draw engine that he brings later on can be huge. So always be wary and check the board to make sure before you turn him sideways, but that 3 lore is still going to be very powerful. And you could always wait till the next turn and just play a Thunderbolt that can enter the play exerted, and now it can quest freely behind Thunderbolt. The other option on turn 4 is to go straight into Perdita, the playful mother, and allow her to start getting more board presence faster because of that questing and allowing the next puppy to come in for 2. If I have to choose, I'm always going to go with Perdita first over the Stitch Rockstar, because Stitch Rockstar's ability is going to work even when he's not exerted, whereas Perdita has to quest. So she needs to be on the board for 1 turn extra before you start using her. Now, that's an overall look at the deck. I wanted to give you guys sort of some strategic thoughts as you're looking at it and things that you can look at. Let's head over to the graph and see how it stacks up on the Robbie C rating scale. Now, this is our first time using this scale, so I want to go ahead and explain things. We've got 4 categories that we're looking at that we're going to rate every single deck in. And I think that these 4 categories, you kind of get to decide which ones are the more important ones for you and which ones are not really an issue. So looking at the cost category, most of these explain themselves. I understand that over 100 range is very, very broad. And for some people, you're going to go ahead and tell me, well, that just doesn't seem very pricey. I mean, $100 makes a lot of sense for trading card games. And I think if you've been in the TCG space for any amount of time, that probably is true. But if you're watching these videos, I would imagine this might be your first TCG that you're trying to get into. We're looking for some more budget and affordable options. And I understand for several people, $100 to get into a deck can feel bad. So where does this deck fall in? At the time of recording this video, if I went to buy this entire deck, I owned none of the cards off of TCG Player, which is where most people buy their singles and different cards, and it would cost me $29.59, which means that this slots in just above the cheap realm. unfortunate because I would have loved to start there, but it's going to fall into our budget category. Now, in terms of tribal, we have 4 different categories. Inside of the tribal, we have the nada, where nothing connects to each other and you're just a heap of characters and cards thrown in together. Cliques, where there are going to be some synergies moving between, like maybe 1 or 2 Maleficents, 1 or 2 princesses alongside of one another. But overall, it just seems to be little clusters of characters throughout. Friendsgiving is our category where most of the characters are going to fit into this larger theme, but there's still going to be a couple that are just not necessarily falling into the vibe of it all. And just like Friendsgiving, they're welcome to come and hang out, but they're always going to know that they're just a little bit on the outside while the rest of the group is very tight knit and together. And last but not least, as Dom Toretto says, I don't have friends, I got family. Family is just a fully tribal deck where everything seems to be extremely cohesive and go alongside one another. I'm going to personally categorize this deck as a family deck. I'm going to put it all the way in the top of the tribal community just because even the cards that don't necessarily say puppy are still dogs in themselves. Now, the competitive tier has 4 different levels to it. I would say you have the living room, which is that you don't really ever plan on taking these decks outside of your family and playing with close friends. And so we want to have a fun time playing a card game in the living room that's just a little beyond starter decks. Next is the computer simulation. There is a website called Inktable where you can go play against AI piloting decks. You're going to go to Dreamborn, find the deck, import it into Inktable, and have a chance to operate it. This is a great way to get a simulation. Playing against AI can be a friendly way to test out a deck and as well as learn the lines and what sort of works and what doesn't. But the computer makes some good decisions, but oftentimes it makes some pretty questionable decisions. So just because you can beat the computer on Inktable doesn't mean that it's necessarily a competitively viable deck. Now, set champs are local tournaments. Set champs is your local game shop that's hosting a Lorcana League on a weekly basis. Would you feel comfortable bringing this deck to there and feel like you could be somewhat competitive? That's what we're sort of looking for. And then at the very end, we have challenge, which is the Disney Lorcana challenge, which is the top end of our sort of hobby or this card game. And those are the most competitive decks that are truly the top of the meta. They've streamlined every aspect of the deck to put no bad cards in there, and they're really pushing the brink of what is possible in the 60 card decks. So where am I going to slot puppies? This one's tough because I definitely think it's a little faster than a traditional living room deck. I think that if you're just playing against casually, it's going to win a lot of games because it's a very fast deck and it has quite a few sneaky draw engines inside of it. As a caveat, you are going to hear me mention our commander pod that my wife and I are building. So for Christmas, my wife got me these lovely deck boxes that look like books, and inside of them we have themed decks so that when we want to introduce people to Lorcana, we can play nice, fun, tribal based decks, really push that Disney theme, but that have a lot of synergies to them. I'll put our 4 current iterations on the screen as well as the ink colors associated with them. And this has just been a really fun, balanced pod, and they're all balanced against each other. I will say some of the decks are a little stronger than the others, but at the end of the day, they all work within one another and they're built for multiplayer as well. So if we have another couple friend over or we have some other friends over, we can all play, grab one of the decks and have a great time. Now, when I played against the computer on Inktable, this was very competitive amongst the other pod decks. And when I started having the computer pilot some more competitive type decks that are more present in the common meta, things got a little tougher, but I was still able to eke out some wins against computer, especially if I was going first. As this is an aggro deck, that's always going to be the case. Now, would I feel comfortable taking this to set champs? I think if this was a theme that I really connected with and loved, I would absolutely enjoy taking it. But I do think that if your local game shops have a little more competitive edge to them, and especially a set champs where there's going to be some prizing on the line, this is not necessarily a deck that I would bring to set champs to feel comfortable with, simply because of 2 major weaknesses of the deck. And that is, first, that spot removal that we talked about. I just don't think that it has a ton of spot removal just based on the color combination alone. And second, which is sort of like a glaring, I don't know what we were doing here. All of the big cards in the deck, the Pongos, the Perditas, and Thunderbolts, don't have a puppy label. I understand it's because they're full-grown dogs. Because they don't have a puppy label, some of your puppy interactions just don't work. So Lucky doesn't look for a puppy. Perdita doesn't reduce the cost of playing any of your other big cards. And then Canine Crunchies also doesn't add a buff of the willpower to any of your big cards that you're like rushing to get to. So I just think that it's like a little bit of an oversight. And then also, why do we not have an actual 1-drop puppy? Stitch does a great job and he really sets up the Stitch Rockstar line. I don't understand why we don't have a 1-drop puppy. That's the biggest miss so far amongst this. So I'm going to have to slot this in at the computer level. Now, is it fun? Sometimes there are decks that are just very boring. They do exactly what they're going to do. This would be most aggro decks for me, where you're just playing these high lore, low cost questers, and you just play them, you turn them sideways. They have no synergy with one another. They just simply quest fast. It can be a real snooze. For me, at least, for several people, I'm sure they enjoy aggro and they enjoy that rush of trying to end the game on turn 4. That's just not going to be for me. A gimmick deck is going to be one that has like a very niche when you live in magical Christmas land where this happens and this happens and this happens, and therefore all of the cards fall together and I've gotten the perfect hand and I'm able to win. That would fall into the gimmick category. Common example of this is going to be the Jafar New World combo, that whenever Jafar is exerted and you draw a card, you gain lore, and if you can whole new world into another whole new world, you can get 14 lore and pretty much win automatically off of Jafar. Old Trusty is going to be where the deck is very consistent and you're having a great time when you play it. You get to see the combos clicking and working quite often. It's not as gimmicky, but it's certainly, you know what to expect when you sit down and play the deck, and it's an enjoyable experience because the deck is always seeming to do what it wants to do. And closing out that category is dopamine. That release of fluid that's going to be so awesome. You're just like, man, that was dope. You have a great time playing the deck. It does so many fun things, has so many fun interactions and things like that, where you are just itching to play again. You're hoping that your opponent lets the game go long so you get to use this deck more often. You can find as many games as possible to do this. You are just really craving the next time that you get to sit down and shuffle those cards and play it again. For me, this is going to fall into Old Trusty. I think that this is a very fun deck. Most often, you're going to be seeing these puppies go around, and when a Stitch Rockstar hits, or you start turning the lucky sideways and starting to see different cards come into your hand, when the deck is cooking, it is a blast to play. And even when it's not cooking, you're still getting to see a ton of puppies and enjoy those vibes of flooding the board. That's going to wrap it up for today's video. I hope that this is helpful. What do you guys think? If you've played puppies before, where would you rate this? Let me know on my scale. Does it seem like things fit? Does it seem like things don't fit? Would love to know your thoughts and what you would change, or what you would change on the tiers. If you're getting into puppies, let me know in the comments down below, and let me know, what deck should we do next? Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have an amazing rest of your day. Make it fantastic for someone else too, and we'll see you soon for the next deck profile. But for now, we're going to leave you with the questing.